This is Larry Jordan, the host of the Digital Production Buzz. The following interview is an excerpt from a recent program. To hear the entire program, visit digitalproductionbuzz.com. Art Adams is a cinematographer with 28 years' experience in the film industry. He spent 10 years in Hollywood working on features and TV series before returning to his native Northern California, where he currently shoots commercials and corporate marketing projects. Between shoots, he works as a consultant for a number of industry companies, including Sony, Sound Devices and DSC Labs, and writes technical and educational articles at ProVideo Coalition and DVInfo. Hello, Art. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a delight having. I had a chance to look at some of your work, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, thank you.
I want to start with something simple. When did you decide to become a director of photography? What was that moment?
I was 12 years old, and I remember watching TV series like The Prisoner, the original series, and a science fiction show called Space 1999. And I remember watching the compositions and the lighting, and mostly the compositions and the blocking and the staging and the camera movement. And the way these shows were shot, they were both British shows. The way they were shot was very different from what I was used to seeing on U.S. shows, which tended to be very formulaic. And what I saw in these shows was much more thoughtful scenes shot in one take, interesting compositions, shifting focus from foreground to background as a dramatic tool. And it just grabbed me, and I decided I wanted to do that. I didn't know what it meant. I just knew that I wanted to be the person looking through the camera making those decisions.
People call themselves directors of photography, and some people call themselves cinematographers. You refer to yourself as a director of photography, a DP. Do you see a difference between the two terms, and why did you pick the one you did?
That's an interesting question. I've thought about that. And I decided that I'm a director of photography because I don't believe that I am the only person making the image happen. I usually work with a very talented crew. They all know how to do their jobs better than I know how to do their jobs, which is why I appreciate them. And I like the fact that I can work with a gaffer and not have to walk around and say, put this light there. I can say, this is what I'm going for. This is how I think I want to do it. Do you have a better way of getting the same thing? And often they do, because that's all they do on a regular basis is solve these problems for people like me. So I work that with my key grip. I work that with my camera assistant, my gaffer. And I try to make it into a team situation. Because for me, the reason people get into this business is because they want to create stuff. And if you take that away from people, then they become less focused and less involved. And while I am responsible for the image, I do want to take advantage of their expertise and get them involved in problem solving and say, this is what I'm going for. You know, what's a better way to do it? And they love that. And it's just a great way to keep the crew engaged and involved and excited about what we're doing. I could walk in and just say, you know, and to a certain extent I do. I say, put this there, I want that, put that through that window. But I do, when possible, try to say, you know, show me a better way.
For those of you watching, Art's website is artadamsdp.com, artadamsdp.com. I mention that because we're going to be referring to some of the movies that Art has posted on his website, and there's a lot of really interesting demos. I spent a wonderful hour getting ready for our conversation wandering around your website. I was looking at the Crema ads, Oriental Training, the HTC Windows Phone, California State Fair, VMware, and more that I didn't even bother to take notes on. And I noticed, one, that you don't have a particular style, but I noticed that most of your sets are highly dressed. They're very, very art-directed, and you tend to work with groups of actors, 2, 3, 4 people, as opposed to just one or huge crowds. I was wondering if that's a fair characterization of the work you're doing now.
That's interesting. I never thought of that. You know, I basically walk into whatever I walk into, and I guess it's either luck or it's the projects that I choose to show. I landed an agent last year. You know, we've had talks about the generalist thing, and it's both a good thing and a bad thing. It's nice to be able to do a lot of different projects. A lot of DPs get hired because they do one thing really, really well. I tend to get hired because people like working with me, and I can usually handle whatever they throw at me. But it's harder to get in the door that way because until they actually know me, they're not necessarily inclined to hire me because I don't have a niche that they need. So it's a little harder to get in the door. It's a lot easier to stay there. But yeah, it's. I wouldn't say that those are necessary. Those That's probably more about just the projects I choose to show than anything else. I do a lot of single person on green screen. I do a certain amount of talking head stuff, which is I live in Silicon Valley. We do a lot of executive talking heads. Um, and the set dressing, sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. And I tend not to show the stuff where it doesn't happen because that set dressing helps lighting so much. It makes my job so much easier.
Why is that?
Well, it's always easier to light something that's there. And, the background is actually the hardest thing to deal with because there's always, if you're on a set or if you're on a location, there's 360 degrees of background. And if that's not dressed, then I have to do something to make that look interesting. And that takes a lot of time. And I don't usually get more time to do that. And that's where I have to just be clever and try to figure out something to do very quickly. But the better dressed it is, the less I have to light it because there's already texture there. And there's always a background. I know where the people are going to be, so they're relatively easy to light, but I don't always know what background I'm looking at. So the more stuff there is in the background, the less I have to work, which is good because schedules are getting really compressed and budgets are going way down. So we have to move a lot faster than we used to.
Do you have a special way of doing green screen to make it look like it's not a green screen shot?
I try. I don't always get to see the background plates. A lot of the time in advertising, which is a fair amount of what I do, these decisions get put off until the last second, or the agency likes to see lots of different options. So I try to get a sense of what the background is going to be. If it's just kind of a general digital background, then I can kind of do what I want. There's one project on my site, VMware. It's a guy on White Limbo. That was fun.
Spectacularly, it was like a minute and a half slow zoom in from a head to toe shot to a close-up with sync sound at the very end. It was a very striking spot with great contrast between the slow move in and the rapid cutting of accelerated footage in between. I was very impressed with that.
Thanks. That was fun because the director asked me for something different. He didn't say, I just want, shoot this guy in front of White Limbo. He said, I want moody, top-lit dramatic. And you never see that in White Limbo, which is wonderful. So I had my gaffer brought a 6K space light. We didn't use all that power, but it's just a big, skirt. And then I had them take a 12 by grid cloth and wrap it. And we called it the jellyfish light because it was basically this big blob. And we hung it right overhead, and we put black in front of the guy's feet to knock out the fill coming in from below. And we shot it. I think I had a little tweenie on a goalpost overhead, just giving him a little extra eye light. And that was a 25-foot dolly move on a 40 millimeter ultra prime.
Wow.
At T8. And I lit it up that way because I knew at the end my assistant was going to have a really interesting time. After a 90-second move to get to the end and go, oh, because it's really tough. I mean, even at T8, he's got maybe almost an inch of depth of field. So it was pretty difficult, but we got into a rhythm after a while, and it worked out really nicely. But I'm really pleased with that spot because there's no color correction on that. That's the way we shot it.
It was a 90-second dolly move, and the actor had to stay in character the entire 90 seconds while this behemoth of a camera is just getting closer and closer, and he's not supposed to twitch.
And it landed,
I was
feet away.
Yeah, you were close to running him over. I was very impressed. That was a cool. And then there was the other spot where you had with I can't remember. Oh, it was La Crema, where you had 4 women doing 3 different scenes without the camera stopping. What was the thinking behind that one?
Oh boy! Originally, that was going to be a big motion control move. We were going to have different settings for different situations where you would be drinking the wine, and the wine was being branded as kind of great for all social occasions, casual and everything else. And originally we were going to do this thing where we'd have a setting and the camera would start on the setting and then pull back, and then suddenly another setting would come through, almost as if they were stacked 30 or 40 feet apart. And the camera would just keep pulling back and revealing these settings. And we ended up not really being able to get the cooperation we needed out of the people with the motion control rig. So the director said, okay, we're just going to do it as a live performance. And that's what we ended up doing. And it took a day and a half to pre-light. And then we just started going. And the final take was take 33 or 34. And the take you saw was the last one we did.
What made it so hard? I mean, you just had 4 people in this small little space. What was the difficulty in getting it lit?
Mostly it was the fact that we had to put up a lot of stuff on dimmers. And because there was a shiny floor, if I just put up a row of par cans as backlights, you'd see hot spots in the floor, which I didn't really want. So we ended up building not really a soft box, but a bounce card along the back wall that we aimed all the lights into so that they merged together. And then we had alternating par cans with different colors on them. And then we would mix the color that we wanted. So we were able to sit at this mixing board and just mix exactly what we wanted. And the stage we had didn't have any of that infrastructure in place. So we had to run all the DMX cable and rig the lights and then keep the softbox from all the lights hitting the softbox from spilling onto the black background and all that stuff. So it took a little while, but we got it.
I was just reflecting on something you said earlier, in that you don't have a particular genre that you work within, which makes it, as you said, harder to get your foot in the door, but your personality makes it easier for people to work with you over the long term. How do you find clients? Let's shift to the business side for a moment. How do you find clients, and do you do anything special besides being nice to keep them?
I tend to be the guy who is nice and easy to work with, and I try to be flexible. I realize it's not my project necessarily. I'm here to make this for someone else. I bring what I think is appropriate, and people tend to work with me because they like what I do for them. But at the same time, if they have specific requests and they want things done a certain way, then it's my job to give that to them.
Well, that also speaks to, how do you deal with creative differences between the director? I'm sure there's times where the two of you don't necessarily agree.
The director always wins. And I try to guide them. There are some directors who are not very visual, and also there are some ad agency clients that are not very visual, or they operate at a different level. I have to sort of bridge the gap between creative and pragmatic. What can we get done, and how well can we do it? And I find that if I can talk sort of in emotional terms. That tends to reach a lot of ad agency types, and a lot of directors respond to that as well. Or actually in pre-production, when I'm asking them what they're going for, I don't always get a lot of concrete direction. And then when I get on set, if I go a direction that I think is appropriate, they may not feel that's appropriate because they haven't necessarily communicated to me the tone or the emotion they want on the spot. So I ask them a lot of emotional questions. What does this feel like? Okay, to me, that feels like it's kind of warm, but contrasty and inviting. Or that feels really dark to me. Is that what you're feeling too? Or shadowy? What do you think? And I try to get a read on them that way.
You've been doing this now for 30 years, give or take a couple. If you could go back in time and give the young you one piece of advice that you've learned over these 30 years as a new DP starting out, what advice would you give them?
Learn the politics faster. I was never a natural politician. As when I was younger, I got the creative and the artistic side, but I wasn't well socialized as a kid. I was very shy, so that took a long time to get over. And I saw friends who did work that I didn't like and I would have done differently get the jobs that I wasn't getting because they could get along with anybody. And that seems to be by far the most important trick for getting the jobs. Once you get them, you have to know your stuff to keep the job, because if dailies don't turn out well for a day or two in a row, they're going to go on to the next person. But getting the job, you really need to be good at networking and making people feel confidence in you, and also expressing confidence no matter what. As I was learning my craft, I would often make things. I would not have time to finish a lighting setup. I didn't have time to do what I wanted. I didn't have the resources to do what I wanted, and I would say, "Oh, I totally missed the mark." But the people I was shooting for loved it, so I just learned to keep my mouth shut. If they're happy with it, then that's fine. I may not always get what I want, but it's more important to keep working so we get more chances to do what we want. So I guess those would be the two things I would say is, learn to play well with others very quickly. And then if you make mistakes artistically, not technically, if you make a technical mistake, you need to say something right now and fix it and go again. But if it's a creative artistic mistake and no one else notices, keep your mouth shut. And when they say it looked great, just go, "Thanks very much. I really appreciate that."
And for people that want to see some of this great-looking work, what website can they go to see it?
Oh, I would recommend mine, artadamsdp.com.
And that's all one word, ARTADAMSDP, artadamsdp.com. Art, this has been a great chat. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.